because of the amount of security incidents that we have, it's mostly not a matter of if one of my third parties will get breached. It's a matter of when one of my third parties will get breached.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 174, Security Concerns in Low-Code and No-Code Applications. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. In previous episodes, we've talked about low-code and no-code and working with systems like Zapier or other things like that to where we can easily wire things together and not have to write real code anymore. Victor, do you think this is going to be continuing to be the way that a lot of development is happening?
I think it will, because it enables non-developers to become developers. I mean, there is, of course, room also for developers to do something more efficiently when it's really kind of like silly type of jobs. You know, I'm not writing an algorithm today, so why not? But I'm guessing that the real market is for the, I don't know, I'm an HR person and I need to do this and that. And I'm sick of opening Jira tickets and waiting for developers to do it for me.
Yeah, the classical answer is I create a spreadsheet and I do all my stuff in the spreadsheet. Think about how many billions of dollars have run through a spreadsheet. On this episode, we have a guest on. I'm going to try to get the name right. I'm going to try my hardest. I messed it up already. Alon Jackson.
No, that's
I still
perfect.
Messed it up. Is it okay? All right.
Yeah, no, that's good. Alon Jackson. Alon Jackson.
All right. So, but to make it easier, and since you've already given permission, we're just going to call you Jackson.
Yeah,
because
no worries.
I won't mess that one up.
Yeah.
We were talking before we started recording. It's like in the States, there's a country music artist called Alan Jackson, and it's spelled differently, but I still can't get the sound of your O right in your first name. So thank you for letting us use. And it's funny because we're saying Jackson and not Jackson.
Yeah.
Right? Because it would seem like, okay, never mind. Bad joke. Or not really. So anyway, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about, and Jackson's from Asterisk Security. Let's talk about a little bit about Asterisk for a moment, and we can talk more about it later too. But just set up around this, talking about non-user access or this app-to-app access that a lot of people, it's like, oh yeah, it's easy to wire these things up, but what else aren't people thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thanks very much, Darren and Victor, for having me here. Yeah, so really what we're building in Asterisk is what we call the first access management solution for all non-user connections. So really helping organizations today unleash this power of automation and third-party integrations while keeping their ever-expanding web of connections under control. So really helping security professionals, CISOs, switch from saying no to saying yes, and enabling their organizations today to connect and create these automations that really help fuel both innovation and productivity, of course. Yeah, so that's like a quick nutshell about Asterisk.
So what does that really help? Because we're talking app to app. I mean, people think, okay, they're using some sort of, let's use Zapier or anything else. I'm going to take this block and I'm going to choose an action to connect to this block. And you think, okay, it's all done. But where's the security in that? I mean, yeah, there's an API token, there's something else there, but that's not really secure, is it?
Yeah, so you could think of it like we used to have the TCP, IP kind of connections between, networks, right? Understanding what's connected to what. In these days, modern environments, it's all about cloud services, right? And application. Everything is moved from the network layer to the application layer. That's where APIs sit, yeah? And really data flows between third parties, between apps by integrating them together. So the instance of Zapier, like you just gave, is exactly that, right? So people in the organization want to automate the work. They want to get notified when maybe the database gets updated, when something, is changed in Salesforce, for instance. They want to get a Slack notification about it, maybe send a mail over to the specific team, open a Jira ticket, stuff like that. Instead of doing this manual process again and again, we want to write automation workflows for this. And this really creates the area where data keeps changing hands, right, between different third-party vendors. And today it's really hard, of course, to get a manage of what's connected to what's the exposure, what sensitive data could leak to unvetted, unverified third parties, because end users, as we said, right, create these workflows, adopt new tools automatically, and want to introduce these new tools into the enterprise workflows, which in turn, of course, connect to critical systems in the organization. Anything from a CRM, database, mailing systems, and so on.
So who's the audience for such a problem? I imagine that the HR person, if you bomb that person with, hey, you cannot do this, the only thing that the person would do is open a window and jump. So is it for security professionals to kind of like enable that catalog of the things that others can use in low code or something like that?
Exactly. We see kind of two types of organizations. One type of organizations are, you can call it a closed gardens, right? The ones that can afford themselves to say no. By affording to say no, so they really disable the ability or prevent or try to prevent the ability of the HR person, right, from introducing new tools and creating these workflows. The other type of organizations are one that can't really afford that, right? They want to run in the speed of the cloud, they want to be competitive and productive, and they want to do it while being secure and really managing these interconnectivities instead of being managed by them, right? So this is really where we help both organizations. So the first one now opening up to the world, right? Being more productive, but still controlling this web of connectivity. And the other types really getting a good grasp of what's going on, what's connected to what. And actually we're finding like thousands of such connections, actually decreasing the attack surface in an instant once we're installed in their environment, to really get only the bare minimum. You can think of it like least privilege, like we know least privilege for user access, right? It's the same thing for non-user access, so for applications, application connections.
So how does that work? If that is aimed directly to that hypothetical HR user, I cannot integrate Twitter with my something. What do I do next?
Yeah, so the first thing will be, of course, to enable or disable by block listing or allow listing different third-party tools into your account, right? So having this policy in place from the first place, instead of just saying, no, you can't connect anything, right? Understanding what you can or not connect according to the organizational policy, according to the risk appetite of your security manager. That's the first thing. The second thing is understanding for you to have a good awareness of what you are connecting. A more sophisticated version of phishing attacks today are called consent phishing. In these cases, end users don't really insert the username and password. They simply click consent. We call it consent fatigue. You just click consent of everything, right? You want to use this tool, you want to adopt something new and connect it to your account. And with consent phishing attacks, you get a link to something that looks innocent. You click, yeah, I want to use it. And it actually gets, high privileges to all your data, sometimes also operations that you can make. And practically it's an account takeover, right? But it's an account takeover that is made through a third-party app that connects to your account. So just knowing that you have just granted or delegated access to a new app is something important both for the end users and for security managers. And because these things are happening, on a daily basis for large organizations with hundreds of instances, just understanding what is interesting, getting through the noise and analyzing the behavior of these inter-app connectivity is something that, it's already a big problem, which will only increase as everything is going to get even more integrated to everything.
One of the things you were saying is with consent attacks, we've seen this, accept the cookies, accept all the other things. I'm thinking about these third-party services like Zapier, and I'm just saying Zapier because it's probably one of the most well-known, but there are multiple.
Mm-hmm.
I'm already giving them access to the services on either side. And up until this point, I've never really thought about it, but that's a fairly big attack surface because now it's not only have I given my key to somebody else, if they get compromised, then I'm leaked beyond that. I mean, how do we deal with something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to think of these major platforms as the new super admin in our organization, right? Because it has mostly admin access to all our critical systems. That's what it actually does, right? It needs to move operations and data between these critical systems to help us do our work. So actually, you can call these platforms iPaaS, integration platforms, low-code, no-code platforms that are becoming very prevalent. The first thing, of course, is visibility. So just understand that they are in use, understand how they're being used, what workflows are being made, so how data is transferring from one side to each other, what third parties are connected on top of these platforms, because of course we're only as good as our weakest link. We have hundreds and thousands of such connections. One is enough to compromise the entire platform. So the first thing is really visibility. The second thing, of course, is automated threat detection, as I said. So understanding what changed, what anomalous behavior is being made, even if it's not an anomalous behavior, right? It's just a redundant access. So it could be a connection that is not being used at all. So just revoking it to decrease the attack surface, as we said before. And last, getting contextual mitigation. So the ability to actually manage the whole connectivity lifecycle, just like we have user lifecycle management. So really app connectivity lifecycle management.
And I imagine a lot of these use cases for using something like Zapier ends up being a shadow IT. Victor said it earlier. It's like somebody in HR or finance doesn't want to open up a Jira ticket and wait for 12 months to even get prioritized to have any work done for them. They're going just to go and do the thing. In what you're seeing from Asterisk, are a lot of these things shadow IT type projects, or were they actual projects that were approved and vetted by the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're seeing a lot of self-service, PLG, like product-led growth motion, where people today, especially in the remote workforce environment, want to use the tools that they know, that they love, or maybe the latest and greatest, and get it to their advantage, mostly without asking the IT guys, the security guys. A lot of the times you don't have to go through procurement because you have the freemium version and just connect it to your account and start working with it. So there's a big aspect of shadow IT in this. So just looking at your Zapier, looking at Workato, at any kind of automation platform, and looking at what's being introduced, what new third-party connectivity do I have now? How is it actually being used? What's the security posture of this connection, of this third party, is super important to understand not only the shadow IT, right? Because if there's something in being introduced into your organization, it matters less if it's not connected to anything, right? If it's not exposed to our critical data. But once it's connected, I want to know, what is it exposed to? Is it connected to my mailing system, to my CRM, to my database? How is it behaving, right? What is actually exposed to? This really helps me prioritize because we have so many different alerts and different applications today in the organization. I can't really go through all of them. Security managers don't really know most of these apps, right? And what we call it's really moving from an application stack to an application network. This context of network really helps us prioritize what matters more.
How do I track these third-party connections? I mean, do I have Wireshark running and I'm looking for outbounds? I mean, as a CISO or as a network administrator, it seems like that's the only way I'm going to be able to track this.
Yeah, so looking at the Wireshark and TCP layer, is, of course, you'll have to be on the endpoint that actually perform these operations, right? And because we're talking in between service to service, right? So when you have a new third-party tool that, I don't know, a sales manager introduced on top of his Salesforce account, now you have two cloud providers that interact with each other. You can't really see the network that goes there. So what we do in Asterix, we actually integrate with another connection that helps monitor and control all other connections to your critical systems. So we actually connect to Salesforce, to your database, to your mailing system, to Zapier, low-code, no-code environments. And from within these critical platforms, we look outwards. We look at all the different connections that were made. So it could be add-ons, extensions, service accounts, just API keys, auth tokens that end users are generating, maybe even webhooks, the other way around. Any kind of application integration that someone could make and delegate access to, we actually monitor both the behavior, the actual actions, and of course the permissions that were granted to these platforms. This is really how we're able to map out this landscape of applications in the organization.
When a project starts up using something like a Zapier, I imagine nobody's thinking about these things at all. Where should they start? I mean, obviously, the fast answer would be, okay, just apply Asterix and life goes on. But let's say they didn't know about Asterix. Where should be that next step they take? Or really, it should actually be the step -1 that they take. Right? It's not even step 0. It's like they should be figuring out the security posture of all these tools prior to actually even doing anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, it's step 0, right? When you think about it, so Workato, Zapier, these kind of tools are actually really a tool. So they enable you to connect things there. You can think of it as a pipeline. And what you should have in place before that is understanding what is your policy? What are your critical systems, right? What do you want or allow to be exposed to each other? And actually, most organizations already have these app-to-app connectivity in place. Once you introduce Workato or Zapier, it just enhances these connectivities and makes it much more prevalent and easier to keep connecting more and more. So when I say step 0 is actually first understanding what's your connectivity landscape before introducing Workato, right? And creating a policy that once you implement using Workato or Zapier, now you can really implement this policy on top of this platform. Make sense?
It does, but I go back to one of the things you were saying earlier, specifically about Asterix. You're trying to get CISOs from no to yes. And as a CISO, even with my security posture, and I'm trying to put in this automation engine we'll use that phrase for Zapier from this point forward. It's like, wait, you mean I'm giving access to my systems to a third party? Okay, I'm not going to do that, but I'm willing to pull that automation in-house, right? I'm going to self-manage that automation engine. Good, bad, or indifferent doesn't really matter at this point. That was the decision that a CISO makes. That's going to open up a whole nother can of worms. Just because we're running it self-managed doesn't mean it's secure either.
Yeah, so really what matters, it's what's actually connected, right? And what matters is understanding, getting the visibility into how these tools are actually being used. So getting the set of policy and understanding what kind of third parties I want to be exposed to what kind of data or what kind of systems will really enable me now to enforce this policy. And this is exactly what we provide. We provide an automatic guardrails that say, okay, hey, X can only be connected to Y, or X is not allowed to connect to Z. And having these policy guardrails automatically save you from connecting malicious or maybe just suspicious third parties to critical data, which of course, without this visibility, without the automatic enforcement, will be very, very hard to actually enforce because of the nature, as we said before, because of the nature of modern workforce, of adopting new tools and connecting them to each other on a daily basis.
So if somebody's trying to figure out, let's say they've not tried no code or low code at all, and obviously you have a solution around it from a security perspective, but if they've never tried it before and they're coming to it new, what is the step-by-step process? It sounds like first off, you've got to do an inventory of, okay, what are the things that I might want to connect? Is that the first step?
Yeah, so the first step would be to really map out the landscape of connectivity the organization already has. So what platforms are in use, what apps are in use, how is it configured, who actually configured most of them, when was it done, is it still in use, stuff like that. Because once you introduce these low code, no code platforms, they will only enhance what you already have and open up many more connections. So the first thing is, as I said, solidifying a good security policy in place. And really in Asterisk, so we support not only these low code, no code platforms, but also the platforms that hold your critical data. So we connect to Zapier, for instance, but we also connect to Salesforce, to Slack. For instance, Slack is a very prominent integrated service. And from within these services, we map all other connections. So the first step will be to really see this map of connectivity and then understanding how do I want to move forward, now introducing this automation platform. How would I want it to be used and not used? And then we can, of course, keep enforcing that. That's if you had us from the first place. The other side is introducing Asterisk after you already have these automation platforms. Of course, in this instance, we will first help arrange the table, so get the mess out of the way. And the next step will be really getting these guardrails in place to help the table not get in mess again.
Talking about messes, what's been the worst mess that you've seen from an Excel spreadsheet becoming the production database for the company? What kind of crazy stories have you seen?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of crazy stories. We've seen some of connections that were made by employees that already left the organization and they're still being used months after, can actually detect these kind of usages. We've seen hundreds of connections that were unknown by security managers to critical systems like CRMs, for instance. The most interesting ones, of course, are the ones that hold extreme exposure, so very high privilege, but are rarely used. Of course, this is just redundant attack surface that is, waiting to be exploited because of the amount of security incidents that we have. It's mostly not a matter of if one of my third parties will get breached. It's a matter of when one of my third parties will get breached. And maybe one of the most devastating examples of these low-code, no-code platforms is the Power Apps by Microsoft. So these Power Apps platforms, of course, are connected to organizational core systems. In this attack that happened just last year, a compromised account allowed threat actors to gain access to the Power Platform instance of a large multinational organization. And the hackers there, they spent the next 7 months evading detection while configuring malicious workflows to actually exfiltrate huge amounts of sensitive data from the organization. So all they did is just configure the workflows to throw the sensitive data out of the organization. Of course, it's really hard to actually detect because we have so many workflows configured on these instances.
You said there's some cases to where you've seen connections for employees that have already left the company. It seems like shy of asterisks, not existing. How should people connect up these connections? It should not be a person probably account. It should be more like a service account. What is the right way to sort of solve for that?
Yeah, so mostly the right way, you're absolutely correct, is to create service accounts, but things are being built bottom up, not always with best security practices in mind. Sometimes you can't really create service accounts. What you really want to do is delegate access to these third parties. The protocol is called OAuth, that's what it does. It provides a third party to create, perform actions and see data on your behalf, right? So it's actually connected to your personal account. That's the problem. And so there are different, integration is a big word. There are a lot of ways to create integrations. Mostly, people are lazy in nature. So we do the least we need to actually get things up and running. And, it's all right. We're all very busy. We need to get the job done, right? So we connect it. Once it's working, we forget about it. So sometimes it's connected via my personal account. Sometimes it's connected via a service account. Sometimes one service account connects a lot of third parties instead of having separation of duties or separation of keys, right? Or separation of accounts. Sometimes it's connected to my organizational account, and then it has like an organization-wide admin privilege. So they're very diverse types of integration. So really the understanding how this integration was configured, right? Who configured it, with what permissions, in what version. These are exactly the things that we're looking into, including the actual behavior, because it could be all right, but then start acting differently later on, is exactly what we're doing in Asterisk, and then surfacing, say, 10% of riskiest connections and really enabling to remediate them, right? Configure them more strictly, or just revoking them, because a lot of the time they're just redundant.
So the Power App story is really scary. And it makes me question, should we even be doing this kind of development at all?
I think there's no way really hiding from it or not going there because of, the shortage of developers with a recent economic situation going out in the world. So organization will be looking to automate themselves more, be more productive, save the expensive workforce of developers. So you really can't avoid not going to these platforms today. This really gets a shift from what we know as DevSecOps, right, to everything SecOps, because it's not only developers. So DevOps, of course, enables developers to automate the work and create better velocity to what they're doing. And when we look at it, we're moving from the automation of the developer environment to the automation of everything. So we have jobs today or roles of product ops, FinOps, financial operations, marketing ops, even security ops, right? Not just DevOps. This is exactly the trend of automating every and each department of the organizations today. That's why really what we believe in Asterisk and what we're doing today is really moving from the only DevSecOps environment to the everything SecOps environment. So it's really not only application security, right? It's low-code, no-code application security.
So break out the crystal ball and let's look 12 months ahead. Where are we at in this connectivity type scenario? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? What's it look like?
100%, it's only going to get messier. Things are going to get smaller. Apps are becoming micro apps. Developer ecosystems on top of these platforms are being introduced because it's important for these platforms to create the marketplace, to open up innovation. That's their growth engine, to really create more functionality on top of their core functionality. So this world of interconnectivity is just going to expand exponentially if we look into the future. As organizations are moving more and more into the cloud, adopting more apps that are becoming platforms in turn, enabling, in fact, encouraging end users to connect and build on top, it's going to get messier, 100%.
Is there any way we can sort of ease that?
I think the best way is to understand that we don't want to really fight it. We want to understand that this is where the world is going, and that's good. We're going to have a lot of very specific tools that help us with a lot of different tasks that we have, and we get actually the value by tying them together and creating this web of connectivity that actually helps us do our jobs. So the idea is to create tools just like Asterisk to help organizations adopt this trend, adopt automation, adopt new tools, but doing it while still being secure and controlling it. As you said before, managing how these connections are made and not being managed by them like most organizations today.
All of Jackson's information is down in the show notes. Jackson, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Darren. Thanks very much, Victor, for having me here.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.